Welcome to What's in Your Neighborhood, conversations for the shame shifter in all of us. I'm Melanie Vargas. After decades in executive leadership and coaching high performers, I've learned the real work happens in the parts that we hide. Each episode, I sit with leaders, rebels, and real people who've taken off their masks to explore their inner landscape, shaping how we live and lead. If you're ready for more truth, courage, and authenticity, you're in the right place. So let's go there. What's in your neighborhood? Welcome back to What's in Your Neighborhood. When I launched this podcast, I wasn't entirely sure what it would become. I knew why I was doing it. I knew I wanted to create a space where people could share parts of themselves that they had never shared before. A space where we could take off some of the masks we wear and talk honestly about the neighborhoods we carry within us, the hidden streets, the quiet corners, and the places we've spent years trying to avoid. What I didn't know was what would emerge from walking through my guest neighborhoods. What strikes me the most is what emerged across all of them. This season was never really about trauma, leadership, addiction, failure, hope, or burnout. It was about coming home. That's the thread. I started the podcast because I wrote a book about my own neighborhood and realized I wanted a space where people could remove their masks and share the parts that they had hidden or felt they had to hide. From episode to episode, guests kept telling me different versions of the same story. Quotes such as, "I thought I had to be someone else. I thought I had to do it alone. I thought this part of me was wrong. I thought failure meant an end. I thought I wasn't enough." And then they found their way back to themselves. And what I discovered is that although the story was different from episode to episode, the themes were remarkably similar. And then somewhere in their story, something shifted. Not because life became easier, not because they were magically healed, not because all the uncertainty and ambiguity disappeared, but because they began finding their way back to themselves, back to their own voice, back to their own truth, back to the parts of themselves that they had abandoned, rejected, hidden, or forgotten. One of my favorite moments this season came from an unexpected place, my husband's episode. He said something so simple, yet it stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Everybody's fighting their own battle. The more guests I interviewed, the more I realized how true that is. Behind every title, every achievement, every success story, every polished LinkedIn profile, every smile, every carefully crafted and curated life, there's a human being carrying something. Grief, fear, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, loss, shame, hope, healing, a dream they're afraid to pursue, a job or a relationship they're too afraid to leave, a burden they've been too afraid to share. And what this season gave me was a deeper sense of compassion, not just for my guests, not just for the people in my life, but mostly for myself. Because if everyone is carrying a neighborhood within them, then maybe we can all be a little gentler with one another as we walk through it. As I thought about how to close this first season, I kept coming back to that phrase, coming home, because that is what I witness in my guests. Different stories, different neighborhoods, different doorways, different metaphors. But again and again, I heard people describe a moment when they stopped running from themselves, a moment when they stopped hiding, a moment when they began to reclaim the parts of themselves that they had abandoned, protected, or pushed away. And it feels only fitting, before I reflect on what this season has taught me, I return to my own story, to one of the moments that changed everything in me. This comes from the final chapter of my book, What's in Your Neighborhood, called Coming Home to Myself. My book is still a work in progress and finding its way into the world, but this part feels important to share with all of you because this podcast began with my own question, what's in your neighborhood? And this is the moment I started answering it. Chapter 12, Coming Home to Myself. Living fully in my real and perfect neighborhood with agency and grace. This is truly coming home for me, connecting it all together. I did not realize at the time, but something had already begun. In the middle of that block party, in the presence of community, I was being led somewhere. Back to the moment that would change everything. Back to the Hudson Institute of Coaching conference with Vince. Earlier that day, I had watched him stand in front of the room and declare with raw courage, I'm learning exactly who the F I am. I was moved, inspired, something deep in me stirred by his words. Later that afternoon, by some miracle, I sat at his table, and I felt it, that familiar feeling rising in my chest. Not fear exactly, not dread, impending doom, something deeper, anxiety maybe, or excitement, a sign. We were assigned an activity where we would engage with a peer coach. This moment at the table where I sat with Vince felt bigger than coincidence. With hundreds of Hudson coaches present, I found myself sitting with Vince. I had sat down first. He joined later. Looking back, it feels like more than just timing. Of all the people in that room, of all the seats I could have taken, I was sitting across from Vince. Something in me knew, or something in me was ready. It was the courage I could not access earlier that day during the What's in Your Neighborhood art activity. Something shifted. I found it sitting there across from him, or maybe I borrowed it from him. And at that moment, I bravely asked him to be my peer coach. And that single ask would change everything. He smiled and said, yes, of course. We found a spot outside near a pit with a sweeping view of the Pacific Ocean. It was cold, so we lit a fire. I felt nervous. I chose to coach Vince first. And I'll be honest, it wasn't my best work. I was still deep in the emotional turbulence from the neighborhood exercise earlier that day. My nervous system wasn't settled. I wasn't grounded. I was aware of shield deep underneath, even though I didn't know him at the time. He was there, just below the surface, watching and protecting. Vince was vulnerable, raw and honest in what he shared with me, making me feel safe to share with him. He had shared a deeply personal story with me. He also shared that he had lost his confidence as a coach. It was his turn to coach me. I felt safe. And in that space, the truth spilled out. I shared what really happened in that room, where we collaboratively built our neighborhoods through art earlier that day. I shared my shame, my story, no masks, and no pretending. I told him I wanted to tell my story. And then he asked me one simple question. That question changed everything. Vince asked me, what's in your prologue? I didn't deflect. I didn't shrink. I stated it clearly and without doubt. I'm a high school dropout. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. I'm neurodivergent and a perfectionist with OCD. I have anxiety, depression, trauma, and complex PTSD, and more. Right there, around that fire, I said the words out loud. And then he asked me, what's the title of your book? I said without hesitation, what's in your neighborhood? We were both crying. He told me he couldn't wait to read my book. And thanks to Vince's gifted coaching, we both got what we needed. He had always been a gifted coach. Hudson gave him the tools, but he had what he needed all along. And I had what I needed in me. Vince and me, we healed a little. We shame shifted together. Thank you for listening to a portion of chapter 12 in my book. I hadn't planned on writing a book. That magical moment led me to writing my book. And looking back now, I realize that moment wasn't really about writing a book. It wasn't even about telling my story. It was about telling myself the truth and letting it out, and about a lifetime of shielding who I really am, a lifetime of feeling like I had to wear a mask to sit at the boardroom or be invited to the table. And what I've learned from every guest this season is that we all have our own version of that moment. The moment we stop hiding, the moment we stop performing, the moment we believe we have to earn our worth, the moment we begin coming home. There's so many parts of this season where I learned from my guests. The conversations repeatedly revealed that behind accomplishments, titles, and success were people carrying grief, shame, uncertainty, burnout, loss, fear, or reinventing themselves. Probably the most defining theme of the season is the masks are exhausting. The more stories I heard, the more I realized none of us are exhausted from being ourselves. We're exhausted from pretending to be what we thought was expected. Amy Nelson's lesson here was profound. Take the swing, she said. What emerged was failure wasn't the opposite of growth. It was often the doorway to it. Community changes everything. This showed up everywhere in every episode. Amy talked about needing people when everything fell apart. Crystal and Trisha talked about hope and community. Kristen Graham talked about learning out loud, my own journey with my recovery community. The lesson is healing happens in neighborhoods, in community, not in isolation. Kristen Graham's episode offers a beautiful bridge. The conversation about neuroplasticity, shame, our inner critics, learning out loud, the words we use, all point to the same idea. We're not finished, we're not fixed, and we are definitely not broken. We are becoming. Diego reminded us that we're not alone. Julie reminded us that enough is a place where we can all arrive at. Dr. Jessica Stone reminded us that our hidden gifts are often buried inside our hardest experiences. Elise reminded us that even our greatest strengths can become masks. Michaela reminded us to ask the question we've all been avoiding. Amy reminded us to take the swing. Vince reminded us to remember who the F we are. Kristen Graham reminded us that we're listening to the words we say to ourselves. Crystal and Trisha reminded us that hope is something we practice. And all of them reminded me that coming home is possible. What surprised me the most is I thought I was creating a podcast. What I was really creating was courage. This entire podcast began with one question. What's in your neighborhood? Vince opened the space for me to answer that question, to be witnessed, to unmask, a space where shame lost its grip. He opened that door for me where I could stop telling the edited version of my story. Most importantly, it's about the moment I stopped identifying myself through my traumas and tragedies and started to see who I really am, my coming home. Because the Melanie at the beginning of the book had spent a lifetime deflecting, shrinking, and wearing masks. As I close this first season, I find myself carrying more questions and answers. How do we create workplaces where people don't have to wear masks to succeed? How do we generate more belonging? How do we lead authentically while carrying our own grief, uncertainty, and healing? What does hope look like as a practice, not just an idea? How do we recover our own humanity in a world that often rewards performance and results over authenticity? How do we help people shame shift and come home to themselves? What neighborhoods haven't we explored yet? What conversations does the world need right now? What are you curious about? When I started this podcast, I thought the neighborhood was a metaphor. Today, I see it differently. A neighborhood is every story we've shared, every guest, every listener, every person brave enough to tell the truth. Thank you for walking these streets with me. Thank you for showing me yours. And thank you for helping me come home to mine. And before we close, a question I've been getting is whether or not there's going to be a season 2. And the answer is yes. I had told myself starting out, if my podcast resonated with just one person, it was enough for me to keep going. And I've heard from hundreds of people what they've taken away from my podcast, including my 85-year-old mom. This season has only deepened my belief that these conversations matter. There are still neighborhoods we haven't explored, the stories that need to be told, questions I'm still curious about, conversations that we need to have, whether it's leadership, recovery, hope, belonging, mental health, identity, and what it means to be fully human in a complex world. So while season 1 is coming to a close, this isn't goodbye. This is a chance for me to reflect, to learn, continue writing, and prepare for what's next. I'll be returning in September this year with season 2 and continue walking through neighborhoods together. Until then, keep paying attention to your own neighborhood, the hidden streets, the unfinished renovations, the places where you've been hiding out or avoiding, and the places that are quietly calling you home. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I'll see you in season 2. Thank you for joining us today. As you head back in your day, we invite you to notice what's happening in your own neighborhood, at work, at home, or inside yourself. Change often starts close to home, and sometimes the smallest shift in awareness can create the biggest ripple. If something in today's conversation stayed with you, we'd love for you to carry it forward and share it with someone else who might need it too. And if you're finding value in these conversations, it would mean a lot to us if you subscribed and left a review. We're just getting started, and your support really helps us grow the community. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.